The clapboard hadn't even finished snapping when the insult landed. Sharp, public, calculated. Crew members froze mid-step as the director's voice cut across the set. Maybe try acting this time. A few nervous chuckles scattered across the soundstage. Not because it was funny, but because no one knew what to do. And standing under the hot production lights, script still in hand, was Will Smith. He didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't fire back. That was the first shock. Because everyone expected a reaction. What they got instead was silence. The cameras were still rolling. The insult wasn't part of the script. It wasn't rehearsal banter. It was ego, unfiltered and loud. The director leaned back in his chair, tapping a pencil against the monitor. "Let's reset," he said casually, as if he hadn't just drawn a line in the middle of the room. The crew moved again, but slower now. Eyes shifting, tension thick in the air. Will stepped back to his mark without protest. "From the top," he said calmly. The director smirked. "Good. Maybe we'll get something usable this time." The scene was emotional, a father confronting loss. Raw, vulnerable, the kind of scene that doesn't survive tension behind the lens. Action. Will delivered the first line softly, voice controlled, layered. But before the scene could build, the director shouted, "Cut." "Too early." "Flat," the director said dismissively. "You're coasting." Crew members avoided eye contact. The lead cinematographer shifted uncomfortably beside the monitor. Everyone felt it now. This wasn't about performance. It was about power. Will nodded once. "Give me a note," he said evenly. The director leaned forward. "Find something real," he replied. "Or we'll get someone who can." There it was. A threat disguised as guidance. The room went still again. But Will didn't rise to it. He didn't argue. He didn't defend his resume. He simply asked, "Ready?" Take 3. This time, the silence on set wasn't just technical. It was emotional. When Will began again, something shifted. His voice cracked at the right moment. Not forced, not dramatic. Just human. His eyes welled without exaggeration. The kind of vulnerability that doesn't beg for attention. It commands it. The room leaned in unconsciously. Even the boom operator held his breath. The scene ended on a whisper. No one moved. No one spoke. Not even the director. Finally, the director cleared his throat. "Cut." A pause. "We'll move on." No praise. No apology. Just forward motion. But something had shifted. The crew had seen it. They had felt it. Whatever tension the director tried to inject had been absorbed and transformed. The rest of the shoot continued under a thin layer of unease. Small jabs. Sarcastic notes. Public corrections. Each time, Will responded the same way. Calm. Professional. Focused. No fireworks. No confrontations. Just work. And somehow, that unsettled the director more than a shouting match would have. Because mockery feeds on reaction. And it wasn't getting any. Weeks later, filming wrapped. There was no celebration dinner. No group photo posted online. The director moved on to interviews quickly, subtly framing himself as the force behind the project's gritty realism. In one press junket clip, he laughed lightly. "Sometimes you have to push actors out of their comfort zone," he said. "Not everyone likes it." The clips circulated quietly, but people noticed. Then came premiere night. Red carpet, flashbulbs, velvet ropes. The theater shimmered with anticipation. Industry executives filled the front rows. Critics scribbled in small notebooks. Influencers filmed pre-show commentary. The director arrived first, confident, rehearsed smile in place. He spoke about vision and discipline to every microphone offered. When asked about working with Will, he shrugged slightly. "We had our creative differences." A harmless phrase on the surface, but loaded underneath. Then the lights dimmed. The screen flickered to life. Opening scene. Strong, clean, polished. The film moved steadily, building tension, layering emotion. Halfway through, the pivotal scene appeared, the one that had caused friction on set. The father confronting loss. The moment that had been called flat. The theater went still. You could hear breathing. The line delivery was subtle, the grief restrained, the pain undeniable. A woman in the third row wiped her eyes. A critic leaned forward, pen paused mid-note. The scene ended on that same whisper. And then, silence. Not confused silence. Moved silence. The kind that holds for a second before it breaks into applause. And it broke. Loud. Unplanned. Mid-film applause rolled through the theater. The director shifted in his seat. He hadn't expected that. As the credits rolled 2 hours later, The audience stood. A full standing ovation. Cameras flashed toward the cast section. Will stood, nodding graciously, hand over his heart. He didn't look toward the director. He didn't need to, because the applause wasn't ambiguous. It wasn't polite. It was earned. Backstage at the after-party, critics gathered around. That scene, one said breathlessly. That was the emotional anchor of the film. Another added, awards conversation, without question. Microphones turned toward the director for comment. He hesitated, just slightly. Yes, he said carefully. He delivered. Delivered. As if it had been accidental. As if it hadn't required craft. But the narrative was already shifting beyond his control. Social feeds filled with clips from the premiere. Headlines read, Will Smith's performance stuns audience. Unexpected emotional powerhouse. The scene that stopped the theater. Noticeably absent from most of them? The director's name. Later that night, in a quieter corner of the venue, a young production assistant from the shoot approached Will. I was there, she said softly. On set. He recognized her. She swallowed. I'm glad everyone saw what we saw. Will smiled gently. Sometimes, he said, you don't answer in the moment. He glanced toward the main ballroom, where applause still echoed faintly. You answer in the result. Across the room, the director watched the press swarm. Watched the praise. Watched the narrative rewrite itself. Mockery thrives in private spaces. But premieres are public. And public proof carries weight. The attempt to diminish had done the opposite. It had amplified. By morning, reviews flooded in. Words like layered, disciplined, career-defining. Interviews requested. Magazine covers proposed. Award buzz trending. The director's earlier comments resurfaced online, juxtaposed against clips of the performance. The contrast spoke louder than any rebuttal could. No press release. No carefully worded clarification. No late-night interview spin. Nothing could compete with footage of that performance and the sound of that ovation. By sunrise, clips from the premiere were everywhere. Reaction videos. Critics pausing mid-scene to analyze micro-expressions. Actors posting praise. One headline cut especially deep. Leadership behind the camera questioned after standout performance. No names mentioned, but everyone knew. In a quiet suite upstairs, Will Smith sat with a cup of tea, jacket folded neatly over the back of a chair. His phone buzzed steadily on the table. He didn't rush to answer it. He didn't scroll endlessly. He just sat there for a moment, breathing. The night had been loud. Now came the quiet part. The part where narratives settle into permanence. Downstairs in the lobby, journalists were still gathering quotes. One reporter approached the director again. There's a lot of talk about that pivotal scene, she said. Did you know it would land like that? The director smiled tightly. We refined it in post, he replied. It was a subtle attempt to reclaim authorship, but the internet had receipts. Behind-the-scenes clips from set were already circulating, snippets of tension, offhand remarks. The now infamous, maybe try acting this time, moment captured faintly on a background mic. Not crisp, but clear enough. By afternoon, industry insiders were whispering. Strange choice to publicly needle your lead, especially one with that track record. Not a smart long-term play. Because in Hollywood, reputation moves faster than box office numbers. And humility ages better than arrogance. Will stepped out onto the hotel balcony, city noise humming below. His publicist knocked lightly before entering. You've got 3 major interview requests, she said. They want to talk about the creative tension. He considered that phrase. Creative tension. It sounded almost elegant. He smiled faintly. Let's keep it about the film, he replied. No attacks. No subtle digs. No score settling. Just the work. That decision unsettled people more than retaliation would have. Because if he had criticized the director publicly, it would have created drama, a spectacle. Instead, he kept the focus on craft. And when one late-night host tried to bait him. So, any difficult personalities on set? Will leaned back and laughed lightly. Every set is difficult, he said. That's how you know people care. The audience applauded. Not because it was clever. Because it was graceful. Meanwhile, the director's inbox was filling with a different tone of message. Producers asking pointed questions. Studio executives requesting clarifications. A future project quietly postponed. Not canceled. Just reconsidered. In an industry built on perception, public mockery isn't a leadership trait. And premiere night had shifted perception permanently. Awards season crept closer. The film continued to gain momentum. Critics cited that pivotal scene again and again, describing it as restrained brilliance and a masterclass in emotional control. The phrase career-defining started appearing more frequently. Ironically, the very scene once labeled flat had become the film's backbone. The director gave fewer interviews now, and when he did, he spoke carefully, measured, guarded. One evening, at a smaller industry screening, a young filmmaker approached Will. "I watched how you handled everything," she said quietly. "On set, in interviews, all of it." He tilted his head slightly. "And it changed how I think about power." He smiled gently. "Power," he said, "isn't volume." He glanced toward the screen where the film's final act was playing. "It's consistency." Weeks later, nominations were announced. His name was there, front and center. Social media erupted again, but this time, it wasn't reactive. It was celebratory. The director issued a congratulatory statement. Polite, professional, brief. The words felt thinner than the applause had. At the awards ceremony, when the clip of his performance played on the massive screen, the room fell into that same silence from premiere night. Industry veterans leaned forward. Newcomers studied every nuance. And when the clip ended, applause rose again, instinctive, unforced. Whether he won or not almost felt secondary in that moment, because the correction had already happened. Publicly, thoroughly, irreversibly. Back at home later that night, Will placed the framed nomination card on a shelf. He didn't linger on it, didn't stare at it long. He simply nodded once to himself. On set, mockery had been loud. Premiere night had been louder. But the most powerful sound of all, the silence that followed excellence. The kind that leaves no room for doubt, and no need for rebuttal. Back at home later that night, Will placed the framed nomination card on a shelf. He didn't linger on it, didn't stare at it long. He simply nodded once to himself. On set, mockery had been loud. Premiere night had been louder. But the most powerful sound of all, the silence that followed excellence. The kind that leaves no room for doubt, and no need for rebuttal.